for having me at this school. It's always a pleasure to come to Florida. And I wanted to give two lectures. One of them, they're both on the same model, but one of them focuses on the fractional Chern insulator in this model, and one focuses on superconductivity in a very, by hand put interaction into the same model. Now, I'm not claiming that this model is the reality, but if it is the reality, then I think it's, could be very pretty and elegant. Whether it's the reality or not stands to be seen from experiments. Now, I'm very lucky to have collaborated with an amazing group of people, some of whom actually could have given the talk instead of me, but they chose to invite me rather than give the talk themselves. So the people who actually did a lot of this work, this is going to be an introductory talk, but at the end I'm going to show results, were the junior people, Jonah, Mingroig, Andreas and Hikshu, and the more senior people, now, I guess, Jabin and Eve, who just have 2 years and 1 year now professors, and of course my long-term collaborator, Nicolas Bernevig, and other long-term collaborators. Now, I'm going to go to very quickly to the moire part of the conference. So how many people here, for example, from the students, obviously, know that graphene in single layer has 2 Dirac points? Is everything good? Okay, fantastic. So this is single layer graphene, has 2 Dirac points. Of course, if you take graphene and do moire to it, then many things happen. One of the things that happens, and the most fundamental thing that happens, is the bandwidth gets reduced dramatically. So you need to do moire to do this, but that was kind of the conventional wisdom. But about 2 years ago, I guess 2 or 3 years ago, in this remarkable paper, and then another remarkable paper, basically with remarkable authors, it was basically shown that, or suggested, maybe not suggesting exactly in the paper because it's an experimental paper, but they were suggested that basically you could have flat bands without moire. So we'll go through that. But mostly my talk, or the 2 parts of the series of this talk, will be concentrated on these 2 types of experiment. This is an experiment where the same type of sample, i.e. ABC, AB, layers of graphene are twisted with respect to boron nitride on one side. On the other side, they're not aligned to boron nitride. The moire pattern here, but not here. And this moire pattern would be there whether it would be twisted with respect to the boron nitride or not, because they have different lattice constants, the graphene and boron nitride. So it would, anyways, is still a moire pattern. And when you plot the resistivity in a plot where you have the displacement field, because you have 2 gates, you can control the density and the displacement field simultaneously, you find, or they find, this type of a phase diagram, where at some densities, which we'll come to soon, over some range of densities, over some range of displacement field, these displacements are actually quite high. Well, it depends what you mean high, but they're not negligible. You start seeing gapped states in zero magnetic field that have Hall conductances. And these Hall conductances can be integer, i.e. 1, or fractional, i.e. 2/3, 3/5, etc. You can't see it from here because they didn't show you the Streda plot, but when we get to it, we'll see the Streda plot, etc. And you can see, quite nicely quantized, the Rxx goes to 0 and Rxy going to integer or fractional values given by a set of integers. This is all at zero magnetic field. And that's why these were the fractional Chern insulators in rhombohedral graphene. which were kind of the second set that was discovered after MOT2, which I won't be talking about. Now, at the beginning, there was a lot of talk which I'm going to go through, of whether this can happen without moire. The reason for this is, as I'll show you later, that even though this sample is twisted with respect to the Boyle's nitride substrate, all the action, actually all these densities, are in a conduction band that actually lives far away from the twisted region. So actually, the conduction band, if you do any theory and any single particle model, doesn't feel the effect of the moire. So then you can ask, is moire really important? And this is part of the things that we're going to try to sort out theoretically, i.e., starting from first principles, basically. But while people were trying to figure this out theoretically, of course, the experiment took over, and they showed that the same sample, but without alignment of the same sample, but the same rhombohedral 5-layer, 4, 6-layer, etc. I think it's 4 or 5 layer, 4 or 5 layers. But untwisted with respect to, so unaligned with respect to boron nitride, so no moire, has in the same region of densities, as you can look here, in the same region of displacement fields, doesn't have any fractional Chern insulators, but has superconductivity. And this always with these moire samples, an embarrassment of riches. You have many phases that you want to characterize. So you can see many different superconducting phases, SC1, SC2, SC3, etc. I will only be focusing on SC1, okay, which is roughly in the same region of density and displacement field as the fractional Chern insulators that appear when the sample is twisted with respect to the moire, to the HBN, and aligned with respect to HBN. So is it clear the two setups that we're going to try to focus on? We're not going to present an answer of what causes the superconductivity here.
Can you say superconductivity all the test to know are maps? What?
Well, here you see gap state, and in between you see some RXX which is non-zero. Here RXX is 0 everywhere. But nah, I mean, well,
usually watch what
I'm just looking at the colors here.
it didn't matter.
So this okay. So if we look at the colors, here is 0, right?
That's no deal.
Okay, what is it?
It's two cut.
Right, 2 terminal.
No,
What is it?
it's not a deal for back.
Okay.
So that's you cannot get a deal like they're not either. It's that supports them not the back. It should that should
So
work.
2 contacts are not working. Okay. So I'm not an experimentalist. I just I just refer you to the color plot here, where you can see that here you have non-zero RXX, whereas here you have 0, right? It's the color plot that was taken from these papers. Okay. Now here you can clearly see in these regions RXY, which is quantized. Okay. So here it's a 4 terminal. You can see RXY, it's quantized. Here there's no RXY, it's quantized. You do see anomalous Hall effect here, but it's not quantized. So that's the story.
One message for I think it's the done written.
They tend to behave differently to magnetic field, etc. So basically, this one is supposedly to be a chiral superconductor, I'm not sure about this one, and I won't be focusing. I just want to focus on the same ones that are in the same region.
Should you kind of stand us, but yeah, you know what?
The what?
G and R farming to buy here the top here. The is everything in omission. Line is that.
Why?
What do you mean? I force you to ABC.
Yes.
So R5G is BG.
Yes.
I understand that R5G that R14 quantity.
No. Because you have Yeah, but you don't. It doesn't work like this. If the hopping is the same, you get. They're very similar. So it's always in the top layer. Okay, it's always. I mean, not fully in the top layer. You'll understand next plot. I don't want to get hung up on four versus 5 layers, but you can't understand this. Oh, here the 5th layer is not working, or I'm not sure what you mean by not working. This, I'll show you where the bands are. The bands are mostly localized on one layer. They go a little bit in the bulk, but they're most localized on layer. Now, they're very similar between R4G and R5G and R6G. They start differing at around 10 or 12 layers. But I'll show you in the next slide how the bands look, okay? But basically, you have to, when you take layers and put them together, the band structure renormalizes dramatically. Just like, one layer has a Dirac node with high velocity, 4 layers or 5 layers have a flat band. So the normalization is dramatic. Now, between 4 layers and 5 layers is not very different, but you can't just say that one layer doesn't matter. It's basically, the action happens always kind of in the last layer. Make sense? I'll show you the band structure very quickly. So, okay, so the strategy that we're going to try to do is, for example, to answer some questions from the audience, to model rhombohedral graphene single particle and get rid of some details. So get rid of, some next year's neighbor, next year's neighbor, hoppings, etc. Try to obtain a model that doesn't have details, to model the interactions, and see what phases emerge with repulsive and attractive interaction, to add moire and see if it's necessary to explain the fractional Chern insulator or not, i.e. try to match the experiment where we see that the fractional Chern insulator and the Chern insulator only appear in the moire aligned sample, and then find if superconductivity emerges naturally under attraction. I'm not going to talk about a mechanism of superconductivity. I don't think that's known, although I'm going to make some comments about Latimer and others. Okay, so now to your question, okay? This is the band structure of 4 or 5 layers, okay? 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers, 4 layers, 5 layers. Blue is the displacement field. When you add it, this is with all kinds of terms, okay? Triangle distortion, all kinds of terms that you might or might not want. This is very, it's got a lot of hoppings, etc. So this is first layer. This is AB. This is ABC, ABCA, ABCAB. Now, you can see how very different this is from this, especially, with or without displacement field. So what has happened here is that the displacement fields and the number of layers have introduced what is kind of a flattish region of space, of momental space, that's a flat band, and then the displacement field has opened a gap without a displacement field. There's a gapless point here given by topology. There's several gapless points, actually, some Dirac points. You can split them, but this would be a 5 vertex. And then with a displacement field, you have this type of band structure where you've moved the conduction band. You get a flat region here, and from the valence band, there's no particle hole symmetry, so the valence band looks more like a Mexican hat than the conduction band, but roughly this how they look. Okay, so now, is it clear, the band structure? That's how. Now, let's understand how this band structure comes about, okay? And the way we can understand how it comes about is through a very simple model. And this very simple model, which I want to get rid of all the details, contains just layers of graphene plus out-of-plane hoppings, first order out-of-plane hoppings, so the nearest neighbor out-of-plane hopping. Now, this particular model here, okay, this black bands are zero displacement field, this blue bands are with displacement field added. This particular one here actually has other hoppings, but forget about them. The first model that we're going to try to look at is just Dirac electrons in each plane with an plane hopping. Any questions? Okay, so for, completeness, this is all the hoppings that people introduced. That's the plot in the previous slide. Okay, now these ones are subdominant. They might play a role. I'm not saying that they don't play a role, but if they do play a role in the actual physics in the end, then it's going to be a matter of details. So let's hope that they don't, and first understand the physics without these extra hoppings. So the most important hopping, as I said, is the hopping T1, and you have an interlayer Dirac term, sigma dot k. This is around each of the k points of graphene. Okay, so each of the k values. Around the big K value and around the big K prime value, you have each of these terms, and you separate the model into the two values. Of course, you also have two spins, and you have this hopping T1, which is of the order 300 electron-volts. Questions? So now if we write this Hamiltonian, we can write it like this. Okay? The first layer is the Dirac Hamiltonian. This is the second layer, another Dirac Hamiltonian, third layer, fourth layer. Now in between these layers, we have this hopping which couples, the A sublattice of one layer to the B sublattice of the second one. You can clearly see this is the AB, ABC, ABC, ABC rhombohedral stacking. So this is how it looks. So now once we have this Hamiltonian, we can understand very easily what happens as I come through the inclusion of that's the only basically kind of the last layer is the most important. The other ones are not. Notice that if we now focus on k equals to 0, i.e. close to the Dirac point of graphene, okay, then this is updates. Then we have a 0 block here, the T1 on the diagonal block here, a 0 block here, k equals 0, and so on. What is this? Well, you can then see that there's dimers at plus minus T1, plus minus 300 millielectron-volts, and a 0 state here, and another 0 state here. Okay? So this is an SSH chain where you have a 0, where you have a state of 0 energy at k equals to 0 exactly. So it's close. So at the big k point of graphene, you have a 0 energy state that's on the top layer, a 0 energy state that's on the bottom layer, and high energy states at plus minus T1. These are the dimers. These ones we don't care about. They're plus minus 300 millielectron-volts. You saw the energy scales that we're looking at, plus minus 20 millielectron-volts. We don't really care about these. That's at k equals 0. It's a SSH chain. Now, what happens when I go a little bit away from k equals to 0, but stay at k smaller than t over Vf? So when you go away from k equals to 0, but stay at k smaller than t over Vf, what you're going to do is that this wave function that was localized just on the upper layer starts seeping into the bulk. The wave function that was localized on the lower layer starts also seeping into the bulk from below. But their energies, as a function of k, are nowhere near the plus minus T1 energies of the dimers, because those are plus minus 300 millielectron-volts and k smaller than t over Vf. Okay? So what happens is that you're going to get two bands localized on the upper surface and on the lower surface that disperse a little bit with k as you go from k to 0 to t over Vf. As you go to k equals t over Vf, they start seeping more and more into the bulk, okay? And at k larger than t over Vf, this approximation that we just used as of SSH chains breaks down and the states permeate into the bulk. If I was to increase the number of layers to infinity, these would be the drumhead states of graphite. And k equals t over Vf would be exactly the point where they permeate into the bulk. Question?
I understand it's the more years, the more it's not for the pan.
Yes, in this approximation. The problem with more layers, more flat, is that when you add displacement field, more layers means more screening. Displacement field is not that efficient to break up the bands. So around 12, if you do the self-consistent calculation, which I'll show, around 12 or 13 layers, you can't really split them very nicely.
It's something that's what you said up. You're putting like we'll make the basis in the CD and then
Exactly. And I always consider a finite number layer 5 or 6 layers.
so when the other night, then it's you go to
Yeah, so this is the number of layers. This is layers. So this is the first layer. This is the second layer. This is just the Dirac-Hamiltonian. And you can see the T coupling between them. But if I took K equals 0, just one DSSH chain, right? With a 0 state here, everything at plus minus T1 dimers, and everything there. As I move away from K equals 0, they'll disperse. We'll see exactly how they'll disperse in the next slide. Sorry.
so when the number low now or the two is like a 10% for the you get to your right.
Well, no, that's not entirely true. So basically, the theory is actually very complicated. So the moral of the story is that if you were to write a single particle model, yes, it will be more flat. But that's not what it goes in the end. In the end, you have when you add Coulomb potential and displacement field, you have all kinds of self-consistent effects, and I'll show some of them. Ciprian here has worked on, also self-consistently modeling it. So that becomes very complicated. It changes from layer to layer. I would say 4 to 6, 4 to 7 is good for FCI. In the other cases, details happen that you might not be able to. Well, I don't think we're at the level of being able to predict, exactly the. Well, if you go to 3, you can see that the bands aren't very flat. You get. But I wouldn't put my hand in fire that you're not going to see FCI at 3, right? So far, we're just trying to get some FCI because there's a big puzzle, as I'll show you, to get some FCI from theory to manage the robust FCIs that they say in the experiment. Questions? Yes, you have a question.
You can also did uncover.
So now I'm going to do the 2-band model. The 2-band model is just this 10 by 10 model, because it's 10 by 10, projected into the upper surface band, and the lower surface band. There's just the 2-band model. Very good. More questions? Okay, now what I wanted to point out is that already some density scales come into play. And the density scale that immediately comes into play is T over VF. As I said, right? There's a T over VF. Pi k squared of that gives you a density scale. That density scale turns to be of the order of the density where they see both the FCI and the superconductivity. So I'll come back to this later. Let me get what's going on here. Right. So it turns to be of this order. So that's pi times k T over, roughly 3 times larger, 2 times larger than this, but of the same order. Okay? The order where they see the density. So that, at least to me, tells me that the action happens where the states are in the momentum space region, where the states are localized on surfaces, or at least seeping from surfaces. Okay, so let's find out what these states are, as the gentleman here said, and built a model that's not 10 by 10 for 5 layers, because I have, 2 by 2 models for each layer, the 10 by 10 for layer. I want to build a smaller model. So it's very easy to find what the states that seep from the upper layer and from the lower layer into the bulk are in perturbation. And the wave functions look like this. Okay? So when k is 0, as I said before, one state is purely localized on the lower layer, the other state is purely localized on the upper layer. Okay? You can clearly see. Here I just draw the A sublattice. Here there's a 0, 0, 0, 0 here for the B sublattice, which I didn't put. There's a 0, 0, 0, 0 here for the A sublattice, which I also didn't put. That's why there are 5 vectors. I don't have space. But basically, the moral of the story is that when you increase K from the Dirac point, as I said, it starts seeping, these states start seeping into the bulk. But they start seeping into the bulk if K is less than T over Vs. They start seeping into the bulk exponentially, as you know, as you can see here, right? So this is 1, this is smaller than 1, this is much smaller than 1, etc., right? So they're still kind of localized on the upper and lower surface. These are the low energy states, okay? All the other states are at plus minus T1. So it makes sense to just project this 10 by 10 Hamiltonian into these low energy states. The other thing that I urge you to see here is that these two states have a holomorphic and anti-holomorphic structure. One of them is purely holomorphic. The other one is purely anti-holomorphic. And that comes from just a simple fact that if you look here, this couple's only holomorphic, okay? And this couple's only anti-holomorphic in these, right, blocks. So you take these two states, these are low energy states, and you do this simple Hamiltonian. And what you get is the well-known K to the N vortex, right? This is K minus to the N. N is number of layers. This is K plus to the N. N is number of layers. The K to the N vortex of the, ABC, AB rhombohedral graph. For example, for 2, this would be K minus to the second, K plus to the second, right? And this is not a particularly good picture because it actually contains other terms. Not, you see, it's not, but basically, the dispersion of this looks like this, and the same up. So you see, it's almost 0 up to K equals of the order T over Vf, and then it goes to infinity very quickly. It shoots up, right? Because when K in units, I'm just going to be talking now about K in units of T over Vf. When K is less than 1, K to the 5th is 0. When K is greater than 1, K to the 5th is infinity. So you have a flat band that basically then goes up. Questions about this? Now, if I don't add displacement field, then these diagonal entries, which are, mostly localized on the upper layer, most localized on the lower layer, are 0. There's no displacement field. And then you have this winding, the wave function winds here by n times pi. So you have a Berry phase of n times pi. And that Berry phase is topological, and you can't break it. You can add, other terms to break into Diracs, into single Berry phases, but you can't remove it. Now, if you add displacement field, the situation changes, the symmetries change. Inversion times time reversal is broken by the electric field. And what happens in the simplest problem, the actual problem is more complicated, is that you add here a displacement field, which is a potential difference between the upper layer and the lower layer, okay? Which is n minus 1 over 2. N is the number of layers. So for 5 layers, this would be minus 2v. This would be 2v, okay? And consequentially, the dispersion changes from just this bands that touch at k equals 0 to bands that touch at k equals 0 plus a gap. And the dispersion becomes this one. So what has happened is that this 5-fold vortex for n equals to 5, for example, is now split into this band that looks like this band that looks like this. If I increase the displacement field even more, they start both looking like Mexican hats. Okay? Question? In this is a plot. So this is this. This is this, where it doesn't have any asymmetry. So the red lines. This is a plot which contains higher order hoppings, which I didn't add here. These higher order hoppings break particle hole symmetry. And, this is a plot from Hanenau and this Nature paper. You can add more next nearest neighbor. For example, there's hopping between this and this. There's hopping between this and this. There's many terms that break particle Hall symmetry. That's where it's coming from. But what I hope is that the physics doesn't depend on those terms. If it does depend on those terms, then, such as light. But if it doesn't depend on those terms, then I claim that you can get to a very beautiful model that describes the physics if it's not dependent. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, then
So the other bands are plus minus 300. Because T1, the out-of-plane hopping is 300 electron volts. You remember the dimers? They started at plus minus 300, then they move up. So they're outside of the range. We have
higher
much higher than the coulometer. Coulomb interaction scale is around 20, something like this. Yeah. Very good. A displacement field of 20 electron volt cannot bring a band of 300 electron volts. Roughly, I mean, you don't have any indication that in the experiment you hit these other bands. Because in order to hit also these other bands, by the way, you need to dope a lot, because this one increases dramatically, so maybe you don't need to dope that much, but you still need, a large, much higher. So there's no indication in the experiment that you hit this remote band, which I haven't drawn they're here. Very good. More questions? Okay. So this is the band structure. So now let's kind of understand roughly how to model it in a way that's simpler. It's already kind of simple. By the way, most of the action happens in the conduction band. Now, for this particular model, which is particle Hall symmetric, this doesn't make any sense to differentiate between the conduction band and the valence. But once I put the moire, it will make sense. So most of the conduction happens in the conduction. Most of the physics of the FCI happens in the conduction band, whereas the valence band is the one that's closest to the moire. Okay, so that's one of the puzzle. But for now, let's just focus on the conduction band, and we can determine some of these things analytically, such as the velocity away. So this point, K point, at which the dispersion stops being almost zero, starts shooting up, is of order VF, T over VF. It depends on the number of layers, the point at which starts shooting up. For example, for 5 layers, it's 0.5 T over VF. For infinite layers, it's exactly T over VF. This velocity here is of the order, number of layers you have here, 0.45, the velocity of the Dirac. As I go to larger layer, it becomes the velocity of the Dirac, roughly. Okay? So you can determine all these, but roughly what you have to remember is flat region and a steep wall that looks like a trash can, which is what I'll be calling this from now on. But fundamentally, this is not just a simple dispersion. And the reason why it's not such simple dispersion is that now this bottom of this dispersion, this flat band of dispersion, has wave functions. These wave functions have their own form factors, and these form factors are very important because they are very similar to those in the fractional quantum Hall effect, at least in some approximation, or in the lambda level, in the integer quantum Hall effect also. Okay, so there was a lot of, maybe not a lot, but there were some people in the literature who basically took the Berry phase of this model by itself and found that the Berry phase is very close to zero. That's true, but this model is written in the basis of these wave functions, which are k-dependent. So if you actually take the Berry phase of the wave functions, okay, because this is k-dependent, so the wave functions themselves have a Berry phase, you'll find out that the Berry phase of these wave functions, which adds up to the almost zero Berry phase of this Hamiltonian, is actually 2 times Vf squared over T squared, and constant, or almost constant. It's not exactly constant, but it's almost constant. When I go to infinity, it's almost constant, but in this case, it's, let's say, within some approximation, within beta squared approximation, so VF over T squared is times K smaller than 1, within this approximation to the next order, this is constant over the bottom of the dispersion. If you have a constant Berry phase at the bottom of dispersion, then the form factors, i.e. the overlap here in the conduction band, the wave function psi b, the anti-holomorphic one, is the relevant one. The form factors, which just come from multiplying the wave function of k to that of k plus q, are actually just that of a Gervin Plassmann-McDonald algebra. Okay? So, within some approximation. Now, you have a system which has a bottom here with wave functions that have form factors which satisfy the Gervin Plassmann-McDonald algebra. But the system is not gapped. It's actually a metal because you have these walls that come up, okay? And you have non-zero density of states everywhere. Okay? You don't have a gap here. And if you ask how much Berry curvature is concentrated in this bottom of the trash can, the answer is non-quantized, and it just takes, you just multiply this 2 beta by pi kb squared, where pi kb squared is 0.52, what I showed you before. So for n equals 5 is roughly 0.52 pi. If I would go to n equals infinity, i.e. the drum has states of graphite, this would be 2 pi. But in this case, it's unquantized. Questions? And that happens for any finite number of layers, unquantized. So yeah, so outside of this basin, I'm not, because that would be wrong. It's not zero. But outside of this basin, I'm not going to be interested in because it's kinetically forbidden. So I'm not telling you that, I'm not saying that this is a, okay, so the question is whether this is reality or not. That stands to be decided. But if this is true, then outside here, I'm not going to care very much because the kinetic energy is going to ramp up so high very soon that only a little bit is going to be available. It's going to be kinetically blocked. Make sense? Very good. Any more questions? Okay, so then the simplest zeroth order model that we can have is the following. This kinetic term, which has this dispersion, and then a Coulomb interaction with form factors that have exactly the Gervin Plassmann-McDonald algebra, and VQ, a density-density interaction, likely screened due to gates. So I don't know what the gates were in this experiment, maybe 5 nanometers, maybe, I don't, but roughly, if the gates are very screened, then I can represent this V of Q even by a constant. So this V of Q is just some repulsive interaction with gates that are very screened, and this is the form factors of the Landau level, except this is not a gap system. And
1, 2. 1.
1, 2. Wow. Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So the zeroth order of what the interactions do, if you're at a density lower than pi times kb squared, is that they're going to polarize the values and spins. And this shows up in Hartree-Fock. This shows up in Hartree-Fock, and you can believe the Hartree-Fock quite nicely here because, at least if these walls were infinite, this would be an exact solution. So what happens is that when your density lower than pi kb squared, i.e. in that experimental region, basically, at least theoretically, there's no other possibility except for that you can calculate that you get, except for 3 of these trash cans going to higher energy and polarizing into one of them. Okay? So then we're at the density here, and now the question is what happens within this metallic system where you have these wave functions with this type of 4 factors and these gapless states. So now we're going to branch out and do 2 things. First, we're going to study add the moire. So far, we haven't added any moire. Now we're going to add the moire. And then we're going to take out the moire and add attractive interactions, which I don't know where they come from, but I'll show the next slide, the last slide, next talk, some conjectures, and see what this model does with those interactions. Questions? That's the strategy.
Yeah, why it's such a problem?
Well, if I have, for example, if you have Landau level ferromagnetism, right? So if I have just Landau level ferromagnetism with all the other Landau levels far away, okay, so in the perturbation theory, 1 over the gap to the other levels, and the gap goes to infinity, then the fully polarized Landau level, I have that Landau level is 2 spins, the fully polarized is an exact eigenfake in the Coulomb interaction. Right?
Well, do your thing.
Exactly. Well, that's what I said. It's not, in this case, it's not exactly exact, but you can believe it. For example, if these walls were infinite, okay, which they cannot be because then you'd have a discontinuity, but if these walls were infinite, this would look like an insulator. So then you could believe it, right? So basically, the moral of the story is that I'm just giving you arguments. You can just do Hartree-Fock and you can see that it immediately polarizes, okay? And these 4 densities. And by going by drawing analogy to the exact solutions that we have in, TBG, quantum Hall, etc. If this was an insulator, i.e. if you had 4 of them and all the walls were infinite, then you'd have an exact solution. So you can believe it more than, this is a Hartree-Fock that you can believe. This is the thing that I want to say. Okay, more questions? Okay. So now let's add moire. So the way we add moire is the way Alan did. We kind of redid it through ab initio just to confirm, because it was 10 years since the paper. We basically sort of confirmed it. So the way you add moire is you do the same trick of putting the Brillouin zone of HBN, putting the Brillouin zone of graphene, and twisting it and, writing some terms in the first harmonic that couple them. Now, this is the experiment, and this is, still not fully understanding what we mean by you can't measure RxX, but this is the RxX, rho XX, and this is the rho XY, okay? And you can see that the fitting 3 halves, for example, the fitting 1 you get nu equals 1, is fitting 3 halves. This is the first version of the experiment. Now they have much better.
Should they get off the data?
This data is from this paper.
From the state paper or different? It's to the
Well, you can check. I think the thing is the same. Huh? I think they're the same. They're certainly the same. It's not such a good quantization. Now they are much better. This one, you think is this one's? Okay, well, to it, yeah, that's good. They all look the same, right? Some of them are better. There's more quantization. Some of them are. This is older data. There's less good quantization. Maybe it's from Thinking Group. I don't remember. Okay. Wait, is there a problem with the data?
If you click on scene of the case, yes, what? If they do,
Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, nowadays it's much better.
the right.
Yeah. Now it's much, okay, yeah. I agree. I believe it. You don't believe it? It's very good quantization. It's okay quantization. Okay? And there's there's more data from long swoop, etc. There's more data that shows quantization, but the moral of the story is that there's quantization when you add Moiré. So the question is, for people that know MOT2, is this a similar story with MOT2? That Moiré folds these bands, okay? In MOT2, the band is also gapless in single layer. Then you add more, you have a band edge, and then the band, as you decrease the density because you're going to the holes, becomes gapless, but the Moiré opens gaps, single particle Chern number gaps, and then you fractionally fill those single particle Chern number gap and get the fractional Chern insulator. So the question was, is this the story? And it immediately became clear that this cannot be the story fully. And the reason for this is exactly this gapless thing that I mentioned, okay? So first of all, if you look at where the HDN is and where the electric field, displacement field is applied, the HBN is on the bottom, which influences the valence band. So you can see that the valence band actually, by Moiré, gets a large gap splitting. Large meaning, 5, 10, something like this, milli-electron volts. Okay? This Chern band, however, is 0. And you can compute it analytically, and in the experiment is 0. You can see it here. This is in the Moiré-Briand zone. You can see it how it's split from the other bands, 10 milli-electron volts, something like this. Okay, but it has Chern number 0. The action, all of the fractional Chern insulator is seen in this band. And this band is far away from the Moiré. As a result of being far away from the Moiré, two things happen. Thing number one that happens is that the gaps that are opened by the Moiré are tiny, 0.1 milli-electron volts. There's no way that these gaps, you can clearly see them here. You can't even see them, right? This is this is just this trash can dispersion folded to the Moiré-Briand zone, this thing, right? You can see it gapless everywhere. Okay, so these gaps are smaller. Moreover, if you insisted that the Moiré acts here in single particle, i.e. if I just ramped up this Moiré 100 times to levels that no ab initio calculation can support, this band would not give you Chern number 1, which is what's seen in the experiment in the integer Chern insulator state at integer filling. It'll give you Chern number either 5 or, depending on the scheme, -1. Okay? But it will never give you 1. So it'll give you 5 in this case. Okay? So many things basically show clearly that this cannot be just a single particle effect of opening gaps into the conduction band and then fractionally filling, getting a Chern number 1 when you open gaps from the single particle, and then fractionally filling it and getting fractional Chern number, as it happens in MOT2, or as it thought to happen in MOT. Questions?
The side we because that
Now, so it turns out the Moiré potential, if I play around and make the second harmonic much larger than the first one, I can get anything. If you play around enough, you can get anything. But within limits, there's a clear reason, because you can see what the components are at the. And basically, what happens is that the Chern number of this band is basically governed by how you split the K point. Okay, or here's the gamma point of 3, the K point of the. So this and the M point when you fold, you take this trash can, you fold it, you get gapless points, and then you split them by the moire. And that splitting is regulated by the first harmonic, second harmonic. So you can prove that within any reasonable calculation, you're not going to get the correct Chern number. Okay, make sense? Okay, so the first question that was asked is, because the band is far away, the conduction band is far away from the moire, is moire important, or can we open a gap without moire? And it turns out that if you do Hartree-Fock, then yes, you can. So what happens is that you plant your Fermi level somewhere here at filling 1 of pi times kb squared, okay? And then you have some Coulomb interaction. This Coulomb interaction is kinetically forbidden, so you only take a little bit of this, trash can dispersion, a little bit, this meaning the Coulomb interaction. And now you look for a Wigner crystal solution. And this Wigner crystal solution is, for example, here I approximate this circle by a hexagon. And these things here are just these kinetically, restricted regions. But you basically look at some Wigner crystal solution and basically wave vector of kb, or twice kb, etc. This vector, okay? And it turns out that this is just a Wigner crystal solution, and which is proposed in these papers, and in Hartree-Fock, in time-independent Hartree-Fock, it's stable. And the stability of it basically gives you also the Chern number. These papers got the Chern number, so this basically the Harvard MIT group, and the CCQ group got the Chern number mod 3, but if you have this trash can model, you can get the Chern number not mod 3, you can get the Chern number exactly. So the Chern number mod 3, the way it works is that you take this band structure, which was a trash can, you fold it, okay? Folding it here gives you a 3-fold degeneracy. Everywhere here, it gives you a 2-fold degeneracy. And now the interaction splits that 3-fold degeneracy and 2-fold degeneracy in Hartree-Fock. And because this is a C3 symmetric point, you can basically characterize the Chern number mod 3 by just, looking at the interaction and seeing which one is favored. So basically, with the Berry trash can, you can actually get the Chern number without any mod. And it turns out that the following happens. The Hartree term prefers Chern equals 1 for the flux in the Berry trash can less than pi. Or I remind you, the flux in the bottom of the Berry trash can was 0.5 times pi. The Hartree prefers Chern equals 1. The Fox prefers Chern equals 0. And it's a competition between them. Okay? And for small phi z, basically the Hartree wins for reasons that I can tell you. This is the phase diagram. But then you can get other Chern numbers, etc. So I can give you a physical reason why Hartree prefers Chern equals 1 and Fock prefers Chern equals 0, but we can talk about it afterwards. These are the Hartree energies. You can find them analytic. Yes?
Just to like study the connected status and my search with the water.
Yeah. So there's no moire right now. We just did a Wigner crystal without any moire.
You left it to that fly. Don't take together.
Sorry?
Why did it tell everything?
Oh, you don't. In Hartree-Fock, you do it, but it's not a stable state, as I'll show. So in Hartree-Fock, the system does have a length scale because you have this flat bottom, and then you have these walls. So the system does have a length scale. So it's natural that something might happen at the length scale. So the most natural thing you can do, as these papers did, is to try to see whether there's a Wigner crystal. In Hartree-Fock, of course, you're going to be able to stabilize it. But I'll show you that it's never stable. Okay, so and what's interesting about this Wigner crystal in this model is that you can prove that the Chern number of the Wigner crystal after it opened the gap is ferromagnetically coupled to the Berry curvature in the bottom of the trash can. So the Berry curvature is up, i.e. at the K point. If you polarize the K point where it's up, you're going to get Chern number 1. Polarize the K prime point where it's down, you're going to get Chern number -1, etc. Make sense? Okay. So, yes.
For the Princeton thing, I guess it's because the kills something.
Well, the reason to assume, there was no reason to assume a crystal state. Okay. The reason to assume a crystal state was at the beginning was the moire is far away from the band where it takes an action. So what can happen without moire? How can I create a gap? It's a gap state because I can see a whole conductance of 1 at least. So it's a gap state. How can I create a gap? There's not many things you can do. One of the things is this one, and Hartree-Fock you get. Make sense? Okay, good. Okay, but there's very many reasons to doubt the Hartree-Fock, and in fact, I want to claim that the Hartree-Fock for this type of dispersion is bound to work worse than the Hartree-Fock for the K-square dispersion, which we already know how bad it gives you in the crystal. And the reason is very, very simple. Hartree-Fock really just takes into account things around the Fermi surface. Okay? So for this type of dispersion, K-squared, these things are sort of kinetically more forbidden than things around the Fermi surface. However, for a trash can type of dispersion, this fluctuation from here to here, or this fluctuation from here to here, or this fluctuation from here to here, they have the same kinetic energy. So this is a much more fluctuating system than this guy. And just looking at things around the Fermi surface is going to introduce more errors here than here. Okay?
Good.
How much more time do I have? Oh, sorry, Nick. Sorry. Close to the end. Okay, one more slide. One more slide. Okay, very good. So, or 2 more slides. Okay. So here's what the Hartree-Fock does. So if you indeed take the Hartree-Fock as I showed you, this is the Berry trash can with a little bit of moire, because you see some gaps. Chern equals 5. This is on the moire-Briand zone, so it's folded. You add Hartree-Fock, you immediately get a flat band of Chern 1. Okay? As was shown in these papers. Now, some people pointed out actually that, the system might be unstable, and I'll show you that the system without moire is actually unstable to making a bigger crystal, and the moire is essential to stabilizing the Chern insulator and the fractional Chern insulator state. And the question is, how does it stabilize? This I argued that the conduction band where all the action happens is far away from the moire. So you can see the tiny gaps here. These are very tiny gaps. I shouldn't even take them into account. So since it's very far from moire, how does the moire act? So that I'll get to hopefully next time. So